In the spring of 1961, a group of college students, ministers, and ordinary citizens boarded interstate buses headed into the Deep South. They were not carrying weapons. They were carrying the law. A Supreme Court ruling that said segregated travel was unconstitutional. What they had found was that the law meant nothing without someone willing to enforce it. This is the story of how they forced that enforcement through revolution, reaction, and reform. The Freedom Rides were organized by the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, in direct response to the Supreme Court's 1960 ruling in Boynton v. Virginia, which banned segregation in all interstate travel facilities. Southern states simply ignored it. CORE's plan was to test that defiance directly. Riders were trained in nonviolent discipline. They signed a code of conduct before they ever set foot on a bus. The rules were precise. Dress professionally. Do not retaliate. Do not fight back. This was not a protest born of anger. It was strategy born of purpose. Among the first riders was John Lewis, a 21-year-old seminary student from Alabama who had trained in nonviolent resistance in Nashville. For Lewis, the rides were not just a protest. They were a moral obligation.
Were nowhere to be found.
They turned on the press, taking people's cameras, smashing people in the face, and just leaving reporters and photographers just bleeding. I was hit in the head with a wooden crate and left lying there in a pool of blood in the streets of Montgomery. And my seatmate, Jim Spurr, was knocked down and beaten much more severe because he was white. If you're gonna beat us, let somebody else see it. Don't beat us in the dark of the night. Beat us while other people watching so they can see it.
Diane Nash, a SNCC organizer who would later coordinate the second wave of riders, described the decision to continue the rides after the first wave was attacked as non-negotiable. The movement could not let the violence be the answer.
It was clear to me that if we allowed the Freedom Ride to stop at that point, just after so much violence had been inflicted, the message would have been sent that all you have to do to stop a nonviolent campaign is inflict massive violence, and that would end it. Well, had that message been sent, we would not have been able to have a movement about any issue.
These were not reckless acts of defiance. They were deliberate challenges to a system that refused to recognize the law of the land. On May 14th, 1961, a Greyhound bus carrying Freedom Riders pulled into Anniston, Alabama. A mob was waiting. They slashed the tires, surrounded the bus, and when it went to a stop outside of town, they firebombed it.
We had definitely been in a great deal of danger, and some people had been hurt, and the intention was, if not to kill us, at least to make sure that we would never do anything like this again, and that was very clear.
Journalists were attacked alongside the riders. The photographs that emerged shocked the nation.
Eventually, it got so dark in there, and it started getting very hot in there, and I knew I had to get off the bus, so I went on out, and that was a sight to behold coming off that bus. People were gagging, and they were crawling around on the ground. They were trying to get the smoke out of their chests and that sort of thing. And it was just a heartbreaking thing to see that Americans would be treating fellow Americans that way.
The next day, newspapers across the country ran the images. The South's violent resistance to a legal, nonviolent protest was now front-page news. violence did not stop in Anniston. In Birmingham, riders were beaten at the bus station while local police stood aside. In Montgomery, another mob attacked riders and journalists at the Greyhound terminal. John Seigenthaler, a personal representative of Attorney General Robert Kennedy, was beaten unconscious on the street. Behind the scenes, federal officials were alarmed but hesitant, showed the government had been tracking the situation for days. Robert Kennedy sent a personal telegram to Alabama's governor demanding protection for the riders. It was inadequate. The federal government was being forced to choose between political caution and constitutional obligation. When the riots reached Mississippi, state officials chose a different strategy. Not mob violence, but mass arrests. Rioters were charged with breach of peace for sitting in desegregated waiting rooms. They were sent to Parchman Penitentiary, Mississippi's infamous max security prison, where they were held in harsh conditions and had their personal belongings confiscated. Mississippi believed that imprisonment would break the movement. It did not. The rioters refused to post bail. They understood that filling the jails was itself a form of resistance. From inside Parchman, they wrote letters, calm, determined, and clear about what they were fighting for. More than 300 rioters were eventually arrested in Mississippi. Corps' legal team fought their cases in court. The arrests made international headlines. Among those arrested in Jackson, Mississippi, was Shirley B. Smith. This is her arrest photograph taken on July 16, 1961, by the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission, a state agency created to monitor and suppress civil rights activists. She was one of hundreds, but she is only one person, with a name, a face, and a family. This photograph is part of our family's history. It is the reason this project exists. History is not only made by movements, it is made by people inside of them. People who chose, in a moment of that matter, to board a bus. The Kennedy administration could no longer hold back. With international attention on the violence and political cost of inaction rising, Robert Kennedy dispatched over 500 federal marshals to Montgomery. It was an unprecedented use of federal authority in a domestic civil rights crisis, but the rioters did not stop. They continued pushing, not just for protection, but for the enforcement of the law that had already been passed.
I think there's a danger of further violence there?
Well, as far as what you mean by danger, I think there's a possibility of further violence. I think it's a remote one, however, quite remote. But a lot of people thought the possibilities of violence were quite remote the other day, on Saturday and Sunday, too. And we're going to stay there a few days, just against this remote possibility of further trouble either in Montgomery or...
The federal government had been forced off the sidelines. The crisis the rioters created had achieved exactly what it was designed to achieve. On September 22, 1961, the Interstate Commerce Commission issued an order number 98 banning segregation in all interstate bus travel facilities effective November 1st. Signs designating white and colored waiting rooms, restrooms, and lunch counters in bus terminals across the South were required by federal law to come down. The Freedom Rides had done what years of legal petitions had not. They created a crisis that made inaction politically impossible, and they forced the federal government to use its authority. Rides did not end segregation overnight, but they permanently changed the relationship between the federal government and civil rights enforcement. They proved that a small disciplined group of people, armed with only moral clarity and a Supreme Court ruling, could force the most powerful government in the world to act. This strategy they established shaped every major campaign that followed: Birmingham, Selma, Freedom Summer. And the people who made it happen were not generals or politicians. They were students, ministers, teachers, ordinary people who looked at an unjust system and decided together that they would not wait any longer.